Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another Season 8 League of Legends Champion Guide. Today I'll be covering mid lane Fizz, the title Trickster.
The mighty shark stalks his prey.
Alright, so let's kick off this guide by first looking at Fizz's pros. So Fizz is a champion with some very high damage, and a lot of it gives him some really high burst potential. If he has a bunch of items and he can get his ultimate on a squishy champion, they will pretty much die instantly. Now he's a champion that also has some pretty high outplay potential and high mobility, which mostly comes from his E. He can either jump onto or jump away from a target and be untargetable at the same time. Now this ability, since it does make him untargetable, also gives him some really nice tower dive potential. He can land his ultimate on a target doing an insane amount of damage, and then afterwards, if he does get targeted by the tower, use his E ability to become untargetable and jump away. Now Fizz of course also has his fair share of cons. Now the first is his pretty high skill cap. He is of course a melee champion in the mid lane, so he can get punished pretty easily by a lot of champions out there, and of course you do have to use your E effectively as either an engage or a disengage. Proper use of course is really important because he is a very squishy champion, and if he does get behind the enemy mid laner, he is pretty weak. He doesn't scale incredibly hard, so he does have to have a pretty successful mid game. Now he is a pretty annoying champion and a lot of people hate playing against him, so he is banned fairly often as well, so you won't always be able to pick Fizz. For your runes, you want to go for Domination and Precision, grabbing Electrocute as your keystone. Fizz of course is a high damage burst mage, and Electrocute just adds a little bit more damage into those combos, giving you even more kill potential. You first want to go for Sudden Impact so you get some nice magic penetration whenever you use your dashing ability, and then go for Eyeball Collection for some nice AP on your takedowns. I then like to finish up Domination by getting Ravenous Hunter, so my unique takedowns also grant me permanent healing for my ability damage. In Precision, I like to go for Triumph and Coup de Grace. Now of course you could go for either Sorcery or something else instead, but I definitely prefer Precision. I first of course pick up Triumph so I get some extra health and some additional gold whenever I get a takedown, and then I go for Coup de Grace so I get some more damage against those low health enemies. For your first summoner spell, you want to pick up Flash. Fizz of course is a rather squishy champion, so you can use Flash throughout the game to save your life over and over again, or of course you can use it offensively and combine it with your Q ability to jump onto an enemy from a really long distance. It has all sorts of uses, and it is a must grab on Fizz. Now for my second summoner spell, I usually like to pick up Teleport. This of course is going to give you a lot more mobility around the map, and you do even have the option of split pushing if you are far ahead, but if you don't like Teleport, of course you could take Ignite instead. Ignite will of course give you even more kill pressure because you will have that additional damage, but usually I just stick with Teleport. Now let's look at your abilities, starting with your passive, Nimble Fighter. So with this passive, Fizz will be permanently ghosted, which means of course he can move freely through minions and take between 4 and 14 based on level less physical damage from basic attacks, which is calculated before armor. So this here is a pretty damn solid passive because not only will you not be blocked by minions throughout the entire game, but you will also take less harassment in the lane phase, which is fantastic because of course you are a melee champion and therefore be abused in a lot of ranged matchups. Other than that, there's not a whole lot else to say about the passive, but it is pretty decent. Your Q ability is Urchin Strike, which is a pretty nice gap closer. When you activate this ability, you will dash towards the target enemy champion and deal 100% AD physical damage and bonus magic damage. This ability will also apply your on-hit effect, so it's great with your Lich Bane, and it will also apply your passive W to all enemies you do pass through as well. So this is a really solid ability because it is a great way to get on top of an enemy champion, and of course you can also use it as an escape if you jump to an enemy minion. And like I did mention, it applies your on-hit effect, so it's a great way to get your Lich Bane's damage out there, and it does apply your W so you won't even have to auto-attack to get it on the enemy champion. All around it is a really solid skill, but we do only want 1 point in it early on because it's not really used for the damage, it's mainly just to get onto the enemy champion and of course apply your Lich Bane and W. So now we arrive at that W ability, Seastone Trident. Whenever you auto-attack an enemy, you will leave a mark on them for 6 seconds, which deals damage to them over 3 seconds. When you then activate the ability, the basic attack will be empowered, gaining 50 bonus range and also resetting your auto-attack timer. It will deal some really nice extra bonus magic damage, and if the target was marked for at least 2 seconds, that damage is tripled. Therefore, of course, you will want to wait until this is on the enemy champion or minion for at least 2 seconds, and then use it afterwards. If this kills the target, the cooldown will be reduced to 1 second and refund mana. So this here is one of your best abilities because you can activate it over and over again throughout the lane phase, and as long as you're killing minions with it, it will be reduced to 1 second cooldown and refund the mana. This ability also does a tremendous amount of burst damage as well, so you want to try to get your W on the enemy for at least 2 seconds and then activate it to do a big chunk of damage. Next up we have your E ability, which is called both Playful and Trickster. When you activate the first part of this ability, you will become untargetable for 0.75 seconds and balance on your trident. Upon reactivation or when the ability does end, you will hop down from that trident, do some nice AoE damage and also slow enemies for 2 seconds. The second cast you can use in either direction, so you don't necessarily have to go the same way you jumped beforehand, you can jump backwards if you did want to. This here though is definitely one of Fizz's best abilities because of course you will be untargetable and you can dodge all sorts of different skill shots with it. The damage is also pretty decent at a 75% AP ratio, and it is AoE, and the slow also scales between 40 and 60%. Finally, this ability you can always use as an engage or a disengage. It is a great way to get on top of an enemy champion to do a bunch of damage, but you can always use it as a defensive as well to jump out of harm's way and get away safely. And finally, we have your ultimate, Chum the Waters. This will throw a lure forward and attract a shark, which will emerge after 2 seconds and deal a ton of damage. It will knock aside other enemies and slow them for 1.5 seconds. The damage and the size scale with how far you shot this from, so you want to try to land it from a pretty long distance, but usually that's going to be pretty hard. If this does hit an enemy champion, it will attach itself to them, so it will hit them pretty much no matter what. It will also apply your passive's W as well, so if you do get on top of them with say your E ability, you can activate your W and do a pretty huge amount of damage really quickly, and usually one-shot a lot of targets. It is a really strong ability, it will do a ton of damage, and if you get it on a squishy, it has the potential to one-shot. For your skill order, you first want to put a point to your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. I then like to focus on maxing my E ability first because it does a really nice chunk of AoE damage, has a really good slow that also scales, and the cooldown drops significantly every time you put a point in the ability, making it a really solid engage and disengage. I then follow up by maxing my W ability second because it does a really high amount of burst damage and it's also great at last hitting throughout that lane phase. That of course means I save my Q ability for last, but I like to take a point early on in it at level 3 so I can gap close onto an enemy champion or use it as an escape on an enemy minion. In the lane, you first want to focus on getting as much farm as possible. You can use your W ability to easily get farm, and of course you want to also trade with this ability as well because it will do a massive amount of damage onto a target if you has it on them for 2 seconds. Sometimes you will be getting bullied in that mid lane, but even under tower with this ability, you can easily farm. You'll then want to focus on using your E ability and your Q for mobility. You can easily use these abilities to close a gap onto a target and get onto them so you can do a bunch of your damage. Of course, you always have the option of using them as an escape as well. Now, when you are level 6 and ready to all in, of course you want to focus on landing your ultimate. If you can get your lure onto an enemy champion, even if you are kind of behind in the lane phase, Fizz has the chance to one-shot targets. He does a ton of damage with a long-range ultimate. In teamfights, of course, you're trying to all in with your ultimate. If possible, you want to try to land it on a squishy target in the back line, but even if you do get it onto the front line, it can do a lot of AoE damage because targets are usually pretty clumped up. Either way, once you land your ultimate on the targets, you want to usually engage with either your E ability or your Q ability. Both of these are great ways to get on top of your targets. Usually I would recommend using the Q so you have your E as a defensive, so I would recommend using that, and when you do have your W on the target for at least 2 seconds, activate your W to do a big chunk of burst. Once you feel like you're unsafe, in that scenario you could activate your E ability and jump out or go even farther into the team fight if you're going pretty successful. Now let's look at some of your hard matchups, and first up is the Donger. Now this matchup is pretty annoying and hard because of course he does have his turrets, and if you do go into melee range to last hit, they are pretty annoying for you and they do a lot of damage. You have to be very careful and make sure you dodge his grenade at all costs because this will empower his turrets, making them do even more damage, and of course he has his Q to add on top of it, and you will get bursted down instantly. You'll need to play pretty passively throughout the lane phase, and when you do get your ultimate, it's time to try to all-in him. For the next hard matchup here, we've got mid lane Irelia. Now she's a pretty hard matchup for you because she is also a melee champion, but she's also a really strong duelist. She can always activate her defensives as well when you do land your lure on her, so she's not going to usually get one shot by Fizz too often. Therefore, be very careful against Irelia throughout all stages of the game, and you may want to spend more of your time roaming rather than sitting in mid and trying to fight her. For the next hard matchup here, I've got Swain. Now Swain is of course a ranged champion that can definitely bully Fizz throughout the lane phase, but he's also got some pretty decent tankiness as well, so he's not that one-shottable. Usually you won't want to spend too much time in lane against him because he is a pretty annoying matchup, so spend a lot more time roaming and trying to get ganks off because Swain doesn't have that much mobility and can't really follow you. And for the last hard matchup here, we've got Talon. Talon is a champion that can definitely abuse you throughout the lane phase because he does a ton of damage, and since you are a melee champion, you unfortunately have to get pretty close to him. He is, however, a pretty squishy champion as well, so you want to try to be a little bit more passive throughout the lane phase, and when you are level 6, you can definitely try to all-in him, although he does have a stealth from his ultimate, you can still one-shot a Talon. Alright, now let's finish this off with your item build, which starts with a Doran's Ring, health potions, and a warding totem. You could of course always go for the Dark Seal as well if you felt like the matchup was somewhat easy, but usually I just stick with the Doran's Ring myself. For the core build, we have the Hextech Protobelt, Lichbane, and Sork Shoes. Since Fizz is a pretty bursty mage, the Hextech Protobelt and Lichbane will both add even more burst damage into your combos and allow you to one-shot a lot of squishy targets and even not squishy targets. Your Q ability also applies your on-hit effect, so it's great with the Lichbane. You will do, as I said, a ton of burst damage with this, and you'll also get a little bit of magic penetration because of the Sork Shoes. Now for your item pool, you first of course have the Zhonya's. This is pretty much an item I always pick up on Fizz because it is a really solid defensive when you do jump into a team fight, and of course it can sometimes give you enough time to activate your E a second time afterwards to jump back out after you do engage. Now, if you're looking for pure damage and you want to just try to one-shot squishies as much as possible, you want to pick up the Rabadon's Death Cap. It will give you as much ability power as possible and make you a very, very bursty champion. If you're then against a team that has some pretty significant magic resist, you of course go for the Void Staff. This will give you the most amount of magic penetration you can get in an item, and it's a really solid way to get through tankier teams. If you're then against champions that do have healing or you want to pick up a bit more magic penetration, you can go for the Morellonomicon. It is a really solid item and especially strong against champions that do have healing. If you are killing a lot of targets and you're snowballing, you could always pick up the Magi's. This has stacking ability power on it, so it is of course great at snowballing through a game and can really increase your damage early on in the game. Now for a really solid defensive, you could pick up the Banshees. This will still give you some really nice ability power increasing your damage, but that defensive shield is great at blocking spells and can give you some really nice survivability. Then, if you plan to spend a lot of time roaming and you want just a little bit more increased burst damage, you can get the Luden's Echo. I don't take it too much on Fizz myself, but if you are spending a lot of time roaming, it is a pretty damn strong item. Then finally, yet again, if you are against a very tanky team, you could go for Liandry's. It's not the greatest item on Fizz, but against a very tanky lineup, it can give you some really nice added burn damage against those tanky targets that have a lot of health. For my example full build though, I like to take that core build, then get the Zhonya's, Rabadon's Death Cap, and Void Staff. You'll be a very bursty champion with a lot of magic penetration, and you'll also have a really solid defensive in the Zhonya's if you do get caught in a bad position. And that's everything for Fizz. If you guys enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and visit my video description below. I have a link to all my social medias, and I do also have a Discord server, so that's one you should definitely check out. But other than that, thank you guys a ton for watching, I really do appreciate it, so take it easy, have a good day, and peace.
When the lights go